my dear adventurers. If you like the story, please subscribe. Welcome back to another evening of shared stories and adventures. Tonight, we're venturing into the misty hills of old Ireland, where the veil between worlds grows thin and ancient magic still lingers in the morning dew. Our tale follows Griswold, a goblin who spent his entire life in the shadow of the great fairy mounds, learning that sometimes the smallest creatures have the biggest hearts, and sometimes, just sometimes, legends are made not by heroes with shining swords, but by those brave enough to question the old ways. I've always been fascinated by Irish folklore, with its complex web of fairy courts, ancient bargains, and the thin line between blessing and curse. So if you enjoy what I do here and want to support the channel, consider checking out my Patreon linked below. But for now, settle in by the hearth, pour yourself a cup of something warm, and let's begin. My name is Griswold, and I suppose you could say I'm not your typical goblin. Most of my kind are content to spend their days stealing chickens, frightening travelers, and causing general mischief across the countryside. But me, I've always been more interested in books than burglary, more fascinated by history than highway robbery, which, as you might imagine, hasn't exactly made me popular among my fellow goblins. I live, or rather lived, in a cave system beneath the Hill of Tara, one of the ancient seats of Irish kingship. The hill itself rises proud and green from the plains of County Meath, crowned with earthworks and standing stones that have watched over Ireland for thousands of years. Humans come here now to marvel at the history, to walk the ramparts and imagine the glory of ancient kings, but they don't know, can't know, what really lies beneath their feet. The tunnels under Tara are extensive, a labyrinth of passages carved partly by time and water, partly by hands both mortal and otherwise. My clan, the Redcap Warreners, has called these tunnels home for longer than anyone can remember. We're not the only residents, of course. The deeper you go, the stranger things become. There are chambers where the walls weep silver water that never dries, galleries where mushrooms glow with pale blue light, and passages that seem to shift and change when you're not looking directly at them. I was born here in a small alcove off one of the main tunnels, during a thunderstorm that shook dust from the ancient stones above. My mother always said that was an omen, that I'd be touched by storm and change. My father, more practical, said it just meant the roof needed shoring up. They were both right in their way. Growing up in the Warren was, well, it was exactly what you'd expect. Goblin childhood consists primarily of learning to steal, learning to hide, and learning to run very fast when necessary. We're taught the old goblin trades, lockpicking, sneaking, identifying valuable objects in dim light, and most importantly, staying far away from iron. Cold iron burns us worse than fire, and even being near too much of it makes our skin itch and our eyes water. But I was always the odd one out. While my siblings practiced picking pockets from our training dummies, I was in the corner reading a book I'd stolen from a merchant's wagon. Not stolen for profit, mind you. Stolen because I desperately wanted to know what was inside. It was a bestiary, beautifully illustrated, describing creatures from across Europe. I must have read that book 100 times. studying the careful drawings of griffins and basilisks, memorizing the descriptions of their habits and habitats. My brother Nash thought I was touched in the head. "Books don't fill your belly," he'd say, flicking my ear with his long fingers. "Books don't buy you a place in the good caves. Books are for humans and elves and other fancy folk who have too much time and not enough sense." But I couldn't help myself. Whenever we raided a farmhouse or waylaid a traveler, while the others grabbed coins and chickens, I'd be looking for books, scrolls, anything with words on it. I learned to read several languages this way. English, Latin, a bit of French, and of course Irish. The Irish was hardest, with its strange spellings and silent letters, but also the most rewarding, because once I could read Irish, I could read the old tales, the stories of the Tuatha De Danann, the fairy folk who ruled Ireland before humans came. That's how I first learned about the courts. Light and dark, summer and winter, seelie and unseelie. The great fairy kingdoms that exist alongside our world, sometimes touching it, sometimes separate, always powerful and always dangerous. I read about Queen Anne of the Light Court, whose very presence could make crops grow and hearts rejoice. And I read about the Dark Court's princes and princesses, beings of shadow and frost who delighted in riddles and tricks. The goblins I discovered were considered neither light nor dark. We were something in between, too chaotic for the ordered light court, too petty for the grandeur of the dark. We existed in the cracks, the forgotten spaces acknowledged by both sides but claimed by neither, which suited most goblins just fine. Goblin philosophy, if you can call it that, generally amounts to: stay out of fairy business, steal what you can, and don't ask questions about things bigger than yourself. I, of course, couldn't help but ask questions. It was on a cold November evening, just after Samhain, when everything changed. I was 23 years old, which is young for a goblin. We can live 200 years if we're lucky and careful. I was sitting in my alcove, reading by the light of a glowstone, when I heard the commotion from the main chamber. Voices raised in argument, the scrape of feet, the clash of something metal. I closed my book, a volume of fairy tales I'd liberated from a sleeping scholar, and crept toward the noise. Goblins are naturally stealthy, and I'd had years of practice sneaking around to read when I should have been sleeping or working. The main chamber of our warren was a large natural cavern, the walls painted with crude but cheerful murals depicting great goblin victories, successful raids, clever tricks, the occasional triumph over a particularly slow-witted ogre. A fire burned in the central pit, and around it stood most of my clan. Maybe 40 goblins in total, ranging from ancient grandmother Grick, who claimed to remember when the Vikings first came to Ireland, to tiny newborns clinging to their mothers' backs. But the attention wasn't on any of them. It was on the stranger standing in the center of the chamber. She was tall, impossibly tall by goblin standards, maybe 5.5 feet. Her skin had a faint silvery sheen like moonlight on water, and her hair fell in waves of silver white to her waist. Her eyes were the pale green of new spring leaves, and they held an ageless quality that made my skin prickle. She wore a dress that seemed to be made of mist and cobwebs, constantly shifting, never quite solid. She was one of the cedar, A fairy, and not just any fairy, but someone of rank, judging by the way power seemed to radiate from her, like heat from a fire. My father, Gorm, stood facing her. He was our clan chief, a position he'd earned through cunning and a certain ruthless practicality. He was bristling now, his sparse hair standing on end, his yellow eyes narrowed. "We want no part of court business," he was saying, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "We've kept ourselves apart as is proper. We pay our tithe when required. We follow the old rules. Leave us be." The fairy woman smiled, and it was like watching ice form on a pond, beautiful and dangerous. "Peace, Gorm of the Redcaps. I come not to threaten, but to ask. Though I suppose to one such as you, there's little difference." Her voice was musical, lilting with an accent I couldn't quite place. Old, ancient, like she'd learned to speak when the language itself was young. "Ask then, and be gone," Gorm said. Around him, the other goblins shifted nervously. I noticed several had positioned themselves near the escape tunnels. "There is a child missing," the fairy woman said, and suddenly her voice was harder, colder. "A human child, taken 3 nights past from a village at the foot of these hills, taken on Samhain night when the barriers were thin. The family is under my protection, though they know it not. I would have the child returned." "We don't take children," Gorm said flatly. "It's not our way. Chickens, yes, the occasional sheep, coin and trinkets, but not children. We've no use for them, and it brings nothing but trouble." "I did not say you took the child," the fairy replied. "I said the child was taken. But you live beneath this hill. You know its tunnels. You hear things, see things that others miss. I ask only for information. Tell me what you know of the child's disappearance, and I shall reward you well." The chamber fell silent. I could hear the fire crackling, could hear the distant drip of water somewhere in the deeper tunnels. Gorm's jaw worked as he considered. "You didn't refuse the Siddur lightly, but you also didn't involve yourself in their affairs if you could help it. Either way led to trouble." "We know nothing," Gorm said finally. "We keep to ourselves, we mind our business. The child's fate is not our concern." The fairy woman's eyes swept the chamber, touching each goblin briefly before moving on. When her gaze found me, half hidden in a side passage, I felt a shock run through me like diving into icy water. For a moment, just a moment, I felt seen in a way I'd never experienced before. Seen and measured and somehow found interesting. "Very well," she said, turning back to Gorm. "I shall not press further, but know this. The child was taken by something that walks these tunnels, something that does not belong here. And when I discover what it is, I shall return and I shall take what is owed. The old laws are clear on this." She turned to leave, her form already beginning to fade, becoming more mist than solid. But as she passed me, she paused. Without looking directly at me, she said very quietly, so quietly I was sure only I could hear. "The child's name is Deirdre. She has 7 years and loves stories. She was taken to the east, where the tunnels run deepest. Perhaps someone brave and curious might discover more than a stubborn old goblin chief could. And then she was gone, leaving behind only a faint scent of hawthorn blossom and the lingering sense of power in the air. The chamber erupted into nervous chatter. Gorm was declaring that we'd have nothing more to do with fairy business, that everyone should return to their normal work, that the whole affair would blow over if we just kept our heads down. Most of the clan seemed relieved, eager to forget the whole encounter. But I couldn't forget. I stood in that side passage long after the others had dispersed, thinking about what the fairy woman had said. A child, 7 years old, taken into the eastern tunnels. The eastern tunnels were old, older than our warren, older than anything I knew. They delved deep into the earth, far beyond where any goblin normally ventured. There were stories about what lay in those depths. Old stories, frightening stories, stories of things that had been here before goblins, before humans, before even the cedar. I should have listened to Gorm. I should have gone back to my alcove, picked up my book, and forgotten the whole thing. That would have been the smart, sensible goblin thing to do. Instead, I found myself gathering supplies. A glowstone for light, a length of rope, a knife, not iron, but good sharp flint, a water skin, some dried fish and hard cheese wrapped in cloth, a book, because I always felt better with a book nearby, even if I couldn't read it while walking. This one was a bestiary I'd been studying, the one with information about various creatures of Irish legend. I told no one where I was going. There was no point. They'd only try to stop me, or worse, tell Gorm, who'd forbid it outright. Instead, I waited until the clan settled down for the night, until the main chamber was empty except for Grandmother Grick sleeping by the fire, her snores echoing off the stone walls. The eastern tunnels began from a small, easily overlooked passage at the back of our warren. Most goblins avoided it instinctively. There was something about it, something that whispered danger in a language older than words. The air that came from it was always cold, always damp, and always carried strange scents. Sulphur and ancient stone and something else, something organic and wrong. I stood at the entrance, my glowstone held high, and felt my courage wavering. This was foolish. This was beyond foolish. This was the kind of thing that got goblins killed, and their bones scattered across tunnel floors as warnings to others. But I thought of the fairy woman's words. A child, 7 years old, loves stories. I thought of all the stories I'd read, all the tales of heroes venturing into darkness to save the innocent. Those heroes were always knights, or princes, elves, or mighty warriors, never goblins. Goblins were the ones the heroes fought against, the obstacles to overcome, the comic relief at best, and the villains at worst. But maybe, just maybe, a goblin could be a hero too. I stepped into the eastern tunnel and the darkness swallowed me whole. The tunnel descended sharply, the walls narrowing until I had to turn sideways to squeeze through some sections. My glowstone provided a small bubble of pale blue light, but beyond it, the darkness was absolute. Not just absence of light, but darkness that felt intentional, purposeful. Darkness that watched. I'd been walking for perhaps an hour, though time felt strange down here when I began to notice the carvings. They covered the walls, floor to ceiling, spiraling patterns and strange symbols that hurt to look at directly. They weren't goblin work. They weren't human work either. These carvings were old, so old that the stone around them had worn smooth, softening their edges but not their power. I pulled out my bestiary and flipped through it by the light of my glowstone, looking for anything that might explain what I was seeing. The book had a section on ancient Irish symbols, and I found some that matched. Spirals for eternity, for the endless cycle of life and death and rebirth. Ogham script, the old tree alphabet, spelling out words I couldn't quite make out. And other symbols, older ones, from before the Celts, from the people who built the great stone tombs that dotted Ireland's landscape. The tunnel opened suddenly into a chamber, and I stopped so abruptly I nearly dropped my glowstone. The chamber was huge, its ceiling lost in shadows above. The walls were lined with alcoves, and in each alcove sat a figure. For one heart-stopping moment I thought they were alive. Then I realized they were statues, carved from the same pale stone as the walls, but so lifelike, so detailed that in the uncertain light of my glowstone they seemed on the verge of movement. They depicted people, or things that had once been people, tall and proud, with angular features and long limbs. They wore robes and crowns, and their hands were positioned in gestures of power or blessing or warning. The Tuatha De Danann, I realized. The old gods, the first fairy folk, the ones who had ruled Ireland before they retreated into the hollow hills. These statues were representations of them, or perhaps, and the thought made my skin crawl, these were them transformed somehow, preserved forever in stone. I moved through the chamber carefully, trying not to look directly at any of the statues for too long. There was something unnerving about their eyes, the way they seemed to follow me, even though they were just carved stone. My footsteps echoed strangely, creating patterns of sound that almost, but not quite, sounded like words. On the far side of the chamber, 3 tunnels branched off in different directions. I stood there, trying to decide which way to go when I heard it. Faint, so faint I almost thought I'd imagined it, singing. A child's voice, thin and wavering, singing an old Irish lullaby. The sound came from the middle tunnel, floating up through the darkness like a ghost. I ran. All thoughts of caution fled, and I ran toward that voice, my glowstone bouncing wildly, throwing mad shadows across the walls as the tunnel twisted and turned, sometimes so narrow I had to crawl, sometimes opening into small chambers where blind white fish swam in pools of still water. The singing grew louder, clearer. I could make out the words now. A lullaby about the sea and the shore, about mothers waiting for their children to come home. My heart was hammering in my chest, my breath coming in gasps. I burst into another chamber, and there, huddled in the corner, was the child. She was small, painfully small, with tangled red hair and a dirt-smudged face. Her dress was torn, her feet were bare and bloody, and she clutched a small cloth doll to her chest. She looked up at my sudden entrance, her eyes widening in fear. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "please don't hurt me. I'll be good. I promise I'll be good." "I'm not going to hurt you," I said, keeping my voice as soft and unthreatening as I could. Not easy when you're a goblin with sharp teeth and yellow eyes and greenish skin. "My name is Griswold. I'm here to take you home." She stared at me, her lip trembling. "You're a goblin. she said, stating the obvious. My ma says goblins steal children and eat them. Well, your ma is half right, I said, trying for a joke and failing miserably. We do steal things, but we don't eat children. Honestly, you'd probably give us indigestion. Too much sugar in the modern diet. She didn't laugh. I hadn't really expected her to, but she didn't scream either, which I took as a good sign. Are you Deirdre? I asked, crouching down to her level, trying to make myself seem less threatening. She nodded slowly. How did you know my name? A fairy lady told me. She said you needed help, so here I am. I held out my hand. Will you come with me? I promise I'll take you back to your family. Deirdre looked at my hand, at my clawed fingers and greenish skin, and I saw her working through her fear, trying to decide if she could trust me. Finally, she reached out and put her small hand in mine. Her skin was warm, too warm. Fever, I realized. She'd been down here for 3 days with no food, little water, and who knew what terrors in the dark. Okay, she whispered, but Griswold, we need to be very quiet. The thing that brought me here, it comes back sometimes. It's looking for something. What thing? I asked, but I was already dreading the answer. I don't know, Deirdre said, her voice dropping even lower. It's tall, taller than my da, and it's thin, so thin. Its arms are too long, and its hands have too many fingers. It doesn't have a face, not really, just eyes. So many eyes. She shuddered. It took me because I wandered too far from home on Samhain night. Ma told me not to, but I saw lights in the hills, dancing lights, and I wanted to see them up close. And then it was there, and it grabbed me, and it brought me down, down, down into the dark. My blood ran cold. I knew what she was describing. I'd read about it in my books, in the oldest texts, the ones written in Latin by monks who'd been told the tales by people who'd been told by others, passed down through generations. A fetch. Or maybe a Dullahan. No, those had horses. This was something else, something older. I flipped open my bestiary with shaking hands, paging through until I found the section on ancient Irish creatures. There, the Fomorians, the old ones, the dark gods who ruled Ireland before the Tuatha De Danann came. Giants and monsters, beings of chaos and night, defeated in legend but never truly destroyed. Just pushed down, deep down into the dark places under the hills. Griswold? Deirdre's voice was tiny, frightened. It's coming back. I can hear it. I listened. At first there was nothing. Then, distant but growing closer, I heard it. A scraping sound like bone on stone, and with it a breathing, wet and labored, that echoed through the tunnels. Come on, I said, pulling Deirdre to her feet. Can you walk? She nodded, though I could see her legs shaking. I took off my cloak, worn and patched but warm, and wrapped it around her shoulders. Then I picked up my glowstone and led her back the way I'd come. We moved as quickly as we dared, Deirdre stumbling beside me, her hand gripping mine so tightly it hurt. The scraping sound followed us, sometimes seeming to come from ahead, sometimes from behind, sometimes from above or below. The tunnels were playing tricks, I realized. Sound traveled strangely down here, bouncing off walls, distorting, making it impossible to tell where anything really was. We reached the chamber with the statues, and I pulled Deirdre behind one of them, pressing us both back into the shadows of an alcove. The scraping grew louder, closer, and then it entered the chamber. I thought Deirdre's description had been childish exaggeration, the kind of thing a frightened mind conjures to make sense of trauma. I was wrong. If anything, she'd understated it. The thing that entered the chamber was tall, easily 8 feet, with limbs that bent at wrong angles. Its body was emaciated, ribs visible through pale gray skin that seemed to be stretched too thin over its frame. But the worst part, the part that made my goblin blood turn to ice, was what Deirdre had said about its face. It didn't have one, not in any normal sense. Where a face should have been, there was instead a smooth expanse of skin, broken only by eyes. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, opening and closing at random across what should have been a face. They were all different sizes, all different colors, human eyes and animal eyes and eyes that belonged to nothing I could name. They blinked independently, scanning the chamber, searching. The creature moved through the chamber slowly, its too many joints clicking and popping with each step. It would stop periodically, its head, if you could call it that, swiveling in ways that no head should move. The eyes would focus on different areas, the smaller ones opening wide, the larger ones narrowing to slits. Beside me, Deirdre had gone absolutely still, not even breathing. I held her close, one hand over her mouth, though she showed no sign of making noise. We watched as the creature prowled through the chamber, searching. It stopped near our alcove. One of its hands, and it had far too many fingers on each, long, spindly things like spider legs, reached out and touched the statue we were hiding behind. The stone made a sound, a low musical note, as though the statue were hollow and ringing like a bell. The creature froze. All of its eyes, every single one, snapped open and focused on the statue, on us. I didn't think. There was no time for thinking. I grabbed Deirdre, tucked her under one arm like a sack of potatoes, and ran. The creature shrieked, a sound like metal tearing, like birds screaming, like every nightmare you've ever had given voice. It lunged after us, its impossibly long limbs allowing it to cover ground faster than anything that size had a right to. We burst out of the chamber and into the tunnels, and I ran like I'd never run before. Deirdre bounced against my side, her cloth doll clutched in one hand, her other hand gripping my shirt. Behind us, the shrieking continued, echoing and multiplying until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. I took turns at random, trusting to luck and instinct, praying to gods I didn't believe in that I wouldn't lead us into a dead end. The creature was right behind us. I could hear it, could feel the displacement of air as its long arms reached for us, missing by inches. We rounded a corner, and I saw light ahead. Real light, not the pale glow of my stone, but warm orange firelight. The main chamber of the warren. We were close, so close, but the tunnel was narrowing, the walls pressing in. The creature behind us had no such problem, folding and contorting its impossible body to fit through spaces that should have been too small. I pushed Deirdre ahead of me, urging her to squeeze through the narrow gap. She scrambled forward, her small size an advantage here. I tried to follow, but I was too big, my shoulders too broad. I got stuck, wedged in the narrow space, my arms pinned to my sides. I looked back and saw the creature reaching for me, a dozen eyes fixed on my face, a hand with too many fingers stretching toward my head. Then something grabbed me from ahead, strong hands gripping my arms, and I was being pulled forward with terrible force. The stone scraped my skin, tore my shirt, but I came through, tumbling into the main chamber of the warren and into chaos. The clan was there, all of them, armed with whatever they could grab. And standing at the front, his face set in grim determination, was my father. "Get behind us," Gorm commanded, and for once in my life I didn't argue. I grabbed Deirdre and backed away as the goblins of my clan formed a defensive line at the tunnel entrance. The creature tried to follow us through, but the tunnel was too narrow even for its contorting form. It thrashed and screamed, its arms reaching through, grasping blindly. The goblins attacked with spears and knives, striking at the reaching limbs. "The fire!" Grandmother Grick shouted from where she stood by the central pit. "Drive it back with fire!" Goblins grabbed torches and thrust them at the reaching arms. The creature shrieked again, louder this time, and pulled back. For a moment, there was silence. Then we heard it moving away through the tunnels, its scraping footsteps growing fainter. I sat on the floor of the chamber. Deirdre still clutched in my arms, both of us shaking. My father approached, and I waited for the anger, for the lecture about defying his orders and bringing danger to the clan. Instead, he knelt down and put his hand on my shoulder. "You're a foolish, reckless idiot," he said, "and I've never been more proud of you." The clan gathered around us, checking us for injuries, offering water and food. Grandmother Grick took Deirdre from me, clicking her tongue at the child's condition. "Fever," she announced, "and exhaustion. But she'll live thanks to our young hero here." "I'm not a hero," I said, still trying to catch my breath. "I'm just a goblin who likes books." "Sometimes," Gorm said, "that's exactly what a hero is." We sent word to the surface, to the humans in the village, that the missing child had been found. We didn't tell them where or how, only that she was safe and waiting to be collected. The villagers came at dawn, a group of them led by a woman whose face was drawn with worry and sleepless nights. Deirdre's mother. The reunion was everything you'd imagine. Tears and joy and fierce hugging. Deirdre's mother kept saying, "Thank you," over and over, though she didn't quite know who to thank. We'd left Deirdre at the entrance to our caves, wrapped in blankets and with food and water nearby, so the villagers never saw any of us directly. But we watched from hidden places as mother and daughter reunited, and I have to admit, there was something in my eye that made it water. Probably just dust from the tunnels. As the villagers left, carrying Deirdre between them, I saw another figure standing apart from the group. The fairy woman from before, though the humans seemed unable to see her. She looked toward where I was hiding and inclined her head in what might have been a nod of respect or thanks. Then she too vanished, leaving only that scent of hawthorn blossom. Life in the warren returned to normal, or as normal as it ever was. The eastern tunnels were sealed off with heavy stones and iron bars that we traded favors to acquire. The creature down there, whatever it was, would not be coming back. At least not through our territory, but things had changed. Subtly, but definitely. My clan looked at me differently now. There was respect there, and something else. Pride, maybe, or hope. I wasn't just the odd goblin with his nose in a book anymore. I was Griswold the bold, Griswold the brave, Griswold who saved the human child. It was embarrassing, honestly, but also kind of nice. 3 weeks after the rescue, I was in my alcove reading a new book I'd acquired when I heard footsteps approaching. I looked up to see Gorm standing there, his face unreadable. "Walk with me," he said, and it wasn't a request. We walked through the Warren tunnels in silence, heading up toward the surface. We emerged from a hidden entrance on the side of the Hill of Tara, looking out over the plains of Meath. It was twilight, that magical time between day and night when the world seems caught between states. "Do you know why I never encouraged your reading?" Gorm asked, staring out at the landscape. "Why I always pushed you to be more like your brothers?" I shook my head. "Because I was afraid," he said simply. "Afraid that if you learned too much, wanted too much, you'd leave. You'd go off into the world and not come back. And goblins need their clans. We're not strong alone. We survive by sticking together, by keeping our heads down and not drawing attention. But I am coming back," I said. "I went into those tunnels and I came back." "You came back," Gorm agreed. "But you went, and that's the difference. You're not like us, Griswold. You're not content to just survive. You want to live, to experience things, to help people." He turned to look at me. "That's not a goblin quality. That's something else. Something better, maybe." "I don't want to leave the clan," I said quietly. "I know. But someday you might need to. And when that day comes, I want you to know that it's okay, that we'll understand." He put his hand on my shoulder, much as he had that night in the chamber. "You're my son, and I'm proud of you, whatever path you choose." We stood there in silence, watching as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. In the distance, lights twinkled from human villages, small and warm against the vast Irish night. I thought about what he'd said, about leaving, about choosing a different path. Part of me was terrified by the idea. The Warren was my home. The clan was my family. Everything I knew was here, beneath the Hill of Tara. But another part of me, the part that had run into darkness to save a child, the part that asked questions and read books and dreamed of things beyond chicken theft and tunnel life, that part whispered, "What if?" The seasons turned as they always do. Winter came, harsh and cold, driving us deeper into our tunnels, where the earth's warmth kept us comfortable. I spent those long, dark months reading, studying, and training with my clanmates. If I was going to keep rescuing people, I'd need to be better prepared than I had been with Deirdre. Nash taught me to fight, grudgingly admitting that book learning wasn't completely useless if combined with practical skills. I learned to use a staff since swords and iron weapons were out of the question for goblins. I learned to dodge, to roll, to use my small size as an advantage rather than a weakness. Grandmother Grick taught me herbalism, showing me which mushrooms and roots from the deep tunnels could heal and which could harm. "Knowledge is armor," she'd say, grinding something pungent in her mortar. "The more you know, the more chances you have to survive." And I taught too, started teaching the young ones to read, much to the surprise of everyone. What began as me reading stories aloud on cold winter evenings became something more. The younglings wanted to know how to make the marks on paper into words, into worlds, so I taught them, and in teaching, I found a joy I hadn't expected. Spring arrived in a burst of green and birdsong. The world above was renewing itself, and I felt that same energy coursing through me, an anticipation, a sense that change was coming. It came on a morning in late May, when the hawthorn trees were in full bloom, covering the Irish countryside in clouds of white flowers. I was above ground, enjoying the sunshine, when she appeared, not the same fairy woman from before, but someone else, someone younger, or at least appearing younger. She had hair the color of autumn leaves, red and gold and brown all mixed together, and eyes that shifted between green and brown and gold depending on the light. She wore practical clothes, leather breeches and a linen shirt, with a bow slung across her back and a sword at her hip. "You're Griswold," she said. "Not a question, a statement." "I am," I replied cautiously. "And you are?" "Neve," she said. "Niam of the Light Court, though I serve as more of a freelancer these days. I have a proposition for you." I should have run, should have thanked her politely and retreated to my warren, but I was a goblin who couldn't help but ask questions. "What kind of proposition?" Niam grinned, and it was the grin of someone who knew they had you hooked. "The kind that involves adventure, danger, ancient mysteries, and possibly saving Ireland from an old darkness that's starting to wake up. Interested?" I thought about my father's words, about paths and choices, about being not content to just survive but wanting to live. "Tell me more," I said, and so she did. She told me about disturbances across Ireland, old places waking up, ancient things stirring in the dark. The Fomorians, the dark gods of old, weren't as defeated as legend said. They'd been sleeping, bound by magic and time, but something was weakening those bonds. The creature I'd encountered under Tara was just one of many that was starting to break free. The courts, both light and dark, were concerned. This wasn't their usual conflict between summer and winter, order and chaos. This was something that threatened everyone, human and fairy alike. They needed people, or beings who could move between the worlds, who understood both the modern world and the ancient one. They needed someone like me. "Why me?" I asked. "I'm just a goblin. I read books and I got lucky once." "You didn't get lucky," Niamh said seriously. "You were brave. You saw someone who needed help and you helped them, even though it meant risking everything. That's not luck. That's character. And character is what we need." She held out her hand. "So what do you say, Griswold of the Red Cap Warreners? Want to be a hero?" I looked at her hand, at the offer it represented. Adventure, danger, purpose, everything I'd read about in my books suddenly being offered to me in reality. "I need to talk to my father first," I said. Niamh smiled. "Of course, I'll wait here. Take your time." I went back down into the warren, found Gorm in the main chamber and told him everything. About Neve, about the Fomorians, about the offer. He listened without interrupting, his face thoughtful. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Do you remember what I told you on the hill about choosing your path?" "I remember." This is your path, isn't it? Not stealing chickens and hiding in tunnels. This, I think so, I said quietly. But I don't want to abandon the clan. You're not abandoning us, Gorm said. You're growing. That's different, and besides, he added with a slight smile, who else is going to teach the young ones to read? I could come back, I said. Between whatever it is I'll be doing, I could come back and keep teaching. We'd like that, Gorm said. Then he pulled me into a hug, quick and rough, the way goblins show affection. Be careful out there. The world is bigger and stranger than even your books can tell you, but I think you'll do fine. You're a goblin, after all. We're survivors. I said goodbye to the rest of the clan, promised Gnash I'd come back with good stories to tell, hugged Grandmother Grick, and told the younglings I'd bring back new books to read. Then I packed a bag with the essentials, my best clothes, my favorite books, my glowstone, and the flint knife I'd carried into the eastern tunnels. Niam was waiting where I'd left her, sitting on a stone and carving something with a small knife. She looked up as I approached. I'm in, I said. What do we do first? She stood sheathing her knife, and that dangerous grin was back. First we go to Cork. There's a bog there, ancient and deep, and something's been taking sheep. The local druids think it's a bog man waking up, but I'm not so sure. Either way, we need to investigate. A bog man, I repeated. I'd read about those. Bodies preserved in peat for thousands of years, sometimes reanimated by old magic. That sounds terrible. It probably will be, Neve agreed cheerfully. But that's the job. Come on, we have a long walk ahead of us. As we set off across the green Irish countryside, leaving the hill of Tara behind, I felt something I'd never quite felt before. Not fear, though there was certainly some of that. Not excitement, though that was there too. It was a sense of rightness, of being exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. I was Griswold, a goblin who'd grown up in tunnels beneath an ancient hill, who'd learned to read by stolen firelight, who'd faced a monster to save a child. And now I was an adventurer, a hero in training, setting out to save Ireland from ancient darkness. My father was right. I was a goblin, and goblins are survivors. But maybe, just maybe, we could be something more than that too. The road ahead was long and uncertain. There would be dangers I couldn't imagine, challenges I wasn't prepared for, but I had books in my bag, courage in my heart, and a friend walking beside me. That seemed like enough to start with. As we crested a hill and Cork spread out below us in the distance, Niamh glanced over at me. So tell me, Griswold, what do you know about dealing with vengeful spirits tied to ancient burial grounds? I grinned, a proper goblin grin, all teeth and mischief. Funny you should ask. I've been reading about that. Chapter 7 of the Comprehensive Guide to Irish Hauntings. I can summarize the key points as we walk. Niamh laughed. A goblin who does research. The Fomorians don't stand a chance. We walked on into the gathering twilight, and behind us, from the hill of Tara, I could almost hear my clan singing their evening songs, the sound carrying across the plains like a blessing. I was going into danger, into darkness, into the unknown. But I was also going toward adventure, toward purpose, toward becoming who I was meant to be. And that I thought, as the first stars appeared overhead, was a story worth telling. The path to Cork took us 3 days, following old roads that wound through the Irish countryside like threads in a tapestry. Niamh proved to be excellent company, full of stories about her various adventures, and surprisingly patient with my endless questions about fairy politics, ancient magic, and the nature of the threats we might face. "You really did read a lot," she observed on the second day, as I was explaining the theoretical differences between different types of undead. "Most people I work with are more of the hit it with a sword and ask questions later type." "Well, I'm definitely not that type," I said, adjusting the pack on my shoulders. "Goblins don't do well with swords. Too much iron. We're more of the avoid direct confrontation if at all possible type. And yet you ran toward danger to save that child?" "That was different," I said. "That was necessary. When someone needs help, you help them. That's not bravery. That's just common sense." "Most people lack that particular sense," Niamh said. "Believe me, in my experience, the truly brave ones are the ones who are terrified but do what needs doing anyway." She paused, looking at me thoughtfully. "You know, when they told me they were sending a goblin to help, I had doubts. No offense. None taken. I'd have doubts too. But I think you might be exactly what we need. Someone who thinks before acting, who considers consequences, who does research." She grinned. "Plus, you're small enough to fit into places I can't, which will definitely come in handy." We reached Cork on the 3rd evening, arriving as the sun was setting over the River Lee. The city sprawled across both banks, a mix of old stone buildings and newer structures, church spires pointing toward the sky, and the river flowing through it all like a ribbon of gold in the fading light. "We're not staying in the city," Niamh said, leading me through the streets. "The bog is to the west, about an hour's walk. There's a farm nearby where we can stay. The farmer's wife is sympathetic to our cause." "Sympathetic meaning she knows about the magical world?" I asked. "Sympathetic meaning she's married to a Selkie, and their children are half fairy, so yes, very aware of the magical world." The farm turned out to be a pleasant place, a stone cottage with a thatched roof surrounded by fields and grazing sheep. The farmer's wife, Siofra, was a round woman with laugh lines around her eyes and hands that looked like they'd done hard work their entire life. She greeted Niamh with a warm hug, and me with barely concealed surprise. "A goblin," she said, not unkindly. "Now that's something you don't see every day. Come in, come in. You must be famished." The cottage was cozy, warmed by a peat fire, smelling of bread and stew. Siofra's husband, Tian, was indeed a Selkie, though in human form he looked like any other Irish fisherman, weathered and strong. Their 3 children ranged from 5 to 12, and they stared at me with open fascination until their mother told them to mind their manners. Over dinner, a hearty mutton stew that was possibly the best thing I'd ever tasted. Siofra told us about the disappearances. "Started about 2 months ago," she said, ladling more stew into our bowls. "Sheep going missing from the fields nearest the bog. At first we thought it was just a wolf, or maybe some lads from town playing pranks. But then," She paused, glancing at her children, who were supposed to be doing evening chores but were obviously listening. Then we found what was left of them. What was left? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Bones, Kian said flatly. Just bones, picked clean, arranged in patterns on the ground. Old patterns, the kind that hurt to look at too long. Sounds like Fomorian work, Neve said grimly. They love their patterns and symbols. It's how they mark territory, how they communicate with each other. There's more, Siofra added. People have been having dreams, bad dreams. They say they see figures in the bog, tall figures walking where no one should be able to walk. And they hear singing, old songs in languages that haven't been spoken in thousands of years. I thought of my books, of all the passages I'd read about the Fomorians. They were chaos made flesh, beings of darkness and primal power. They'd ruled Ireland in the ancient times before the Tuatha De Danann came and defeated them. But defeated didn't mean destroyed. The Fomorians had been bound, imprisoned, pushed down into the deepest, darkest places, under hills, under water, under bogs. Tomorrow, Niamh said, we go to the bog. We investigate. We find out what's waking up, and we stop it. And if we can't stop it, I asked, then we slow it down and call for backup, Niamh said. This is reconnaissance, not a suicide mission. Though I'll be honest with you, Griswold, backup might take time to arrive. The courts are stretched thin right now. Too many disturbances, not enough people to handle them all. That night, I lay on a pallet in the corner of the cottage's main room, unable to sleep. Through the small window, I could see stars bright and clear in the Irish sky. I thought about my clan, safely tucked in their warren beneath the hill of Tara. I thought about Deirdre, hopefully safe at home with her mother. I thought about what tomorrow might bring. From across the room, Niamh's voice came soft through the darkness. Having second thoughts? Third and fourth thoughts, I admitted. But I'm still going. Good. I'd hate to have to find another goblin who reads as much as you do. They're in short supply. I smiled in the darkness. Niamh, can I ask you something? Sure. Why are you doing this, your light court? You could be at the palace, or whatever it is you call it, living in comfort and luxury. Instead, you're out here chasing monsters through bogs. There was a long pause. Then, because someone has to. Because the old darkness is waking up, and if we don't stop it, there won't be any palaces or courts or safe places anywhere. And because, another pause, because a long time ago, someone saved my life. Someone who had no reason to help me. Who risked everything to pull me out of darkness. I've been trying to pay that forward ever since. Who was it? The one who saved you? That's a story for another night, Niamh said. Get some sleep, Griswold. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. Dawn came cold and misty, the kind of morning where moisture hangs in the air and makes everything damp. After a breakfast of porridge and fresh bread, Niamh and I set out toward the bog, following a rough path through the fields. The bog spread out before us like a wound in the earth. Dark water glinted between clumps of sedge and heather, and peat banks rose like small islands from the wetlands. The whole place had an oppressive feel, as though the air itself was heavy with age and secrets. Ah, Bogs are liminal spaces, I said, remembering my reading. Neither land nor water, preserving things that should decay, holding on to the past, which makes them perfect prisons for things that shouldn't exist anymore, Niev added. Stay close to me, watch where you step, and if you see anything unusual, anything at all, tell me immediately. We picked our way carefully across the bog, hopping from tussock to tussock, avoiding the dark water. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional cry of a bird or the whisper of wind through the reeds. We found the first pattern after about an hour of searching, just as Cian had described, bones arranged in spirals and geometric shapes that made my eyes water when I tried to follow them. Sheep bones, I thought, though some of them looked almost deliberately shaped, carved with marks that were definitely not natural. Fomorian script, Niev said, kneeling to examine them more closely. Old, powerful. This is a summoning pattern, or maybe a doorway. They're trying to bring something through, or someone. Can you read what it says? Some of it. It's asking for passage, for freedom, for revenge on those who bound them. Standard Fomorian complaints. She stood, brushing peat from her knees. The question is, where's the center? These patterns always have a focal point, a place where the magic is concentrated. We followed the patterns, finding more arrangements of bones, more symbols carved into the peat itself. They led us deeper into the bog, to a place where the water seemed darker, where the mist hung thicker, where the very air felt wrong. And there, in the center of a small clearing, we found it. A pit, maybe 10 feet across, filled with black water that didn't reflect the sky. And in that water something moved. It rose slowly, water streaming from its form, revealing a figure that might have once been human but had been changed by time and dark magic. Its skin was black with peat, preserved and leathery. It wore the remains of ancient clothing, bronze torques and beads of amber. But its eyes, gods, its eyes were alive and burning with cold, blue fire. A bogman, Niev breathed. But not just any bogman. This one's been possessed. There's something else inside it, using it as a vessel. The creature turned those burning eyes on us and spoke in a voice like grinding stone. The time of binding is ending. The old ones will walk the green land again. Ireland will remember its first masters. Not if we have anything to say about it, Niev replied, her hand going to her sword. The bogman laughed, a horrible sound like water choking in a throat. A fairy and a goblin. This is what the court send against us? We who ruled when the world was young, we are not afraid. You should be, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. I'd been reading a lot about Fomorian magic, about their weaknesses. You're not as powerful as you think. You're stuck in a borrowed body, in a place that's neither land nor water, unable to fully manifest. You're reaching through cracks, hoping to widen them enough to escape, but you haven't yet. You're still trapped. The burning eyes fixed on me, and I felt the weight of ancient anger pressing down. Clever little goblin. Yes, we are still bound, but not for long. Each night, the bonds weaken. Each sacrifice, each soul we consume, brings us closer to freedom. Then we'd better make sure you don't get any more sacrifices, Niev said. She drew her sword, and it blazed with light, pure and bright, making the bogman recoil. By the authority of the Light Court, I banish you back to the darkness. Return to your prison and sleep. The Light Court has no authority over us, the Bogman hissed. We predate your precious order, your rules, your very existence. We are the chaos from which all things came, and to chaos we shall return all things. It lunged forward, faster than anything the dead should be able to move, its preserved hands reaching for Knave. She met it with her sword, the blade cutting through ancient flesh. But the creature barely seemed to notice. It backhanded her, sending her flying into the peat bank. I did the only thing I could think of. I threw my book at it. Not just any book. The bestiary I'd been carrying, the heavy leather-bound tome that weighed about 5 pounds. It hit the Bogman square in what passed for its face, and while it didn't hurt it, it did surprise it enough to make it pause, which gave me time to run to Neve's side. She was conscious, but winded, struggling to get up. That was, she gasped, either very brave or very stupid. Both, I said, helping her to her feet. Now what? Now we try plan B. She reached into her pack and pulled out a small clay pot sealed with wax. Holy water blessed by druids under the full moon, mixed with iron shavings and salt from the ancient sea. It should bind anything Fomorian, at least temporarily. Should. Only one way to find out. She threw the pot at the Bogman. It shattered against its chest, and the mixture exploded outward in a burst of steam and light. The Bogman shrieked, a sound that made my bones ache and my teeth hurt. It clawed at its chest where the mixture had hit, and I saw the preserved flesh beginning to smoke and crack. The blue fire in its eyes flickered, dimmed. More! Neve shouted, pulling out 2 more pots from her pack. Whatever you've got that's blessed or holy, use it now. I didn't have holy water. What I had was my glowstone, the one I'd carried into the eastern tunnels, the one that had lit my way since I was a youngling learning to read in hidden corners. It had been with me for so long, soaked in so many hours of learning and wonder and quiet joy, that it had become something more than just a stone. I threw it at the Bogman, and as it flew through the air, it blazed brighter than I'd ever seen it. Bright as a star, bright as hope itself. When it hit the creature, the effect was immediate and dramatic. The Bogman came apart, not violently, but like smoke or dispersing in wind. The preserved body collapsed back into the black water, and the blue fire in its eyes went out like candles being snuffed. For a moment, I saw something else, something vast and dark and angry, reaching toward us from somewhere impossibly far away. Then it too was gone, pulled back by forces I didn't understand. The bog was silent again, just wind and water and the cry of distant birds. Niam and I stood there, breathing hard, waiting to see if the fight was really over. Is it dead? I asked after a moment. Fomorians can't really die, Niamh said, but we've banished it, sent it back to wherever it was trying to escape from. That body it was using is finished. It'll take it years, maybe decades, to gather enough power to try again. I walked over to where my glowstone had fallen into the peat. It was dim now, its light spent, but still intact. I picked it up carefully, cradling it in my hands. That was quick thinking, Niamh said, coming to stand beside me. Using your glowstone like that. How did you know it would work? I didn't, I admitted. I just knew that it had been with me for so long, meant so much to me, that maybe it had absorbed something. Good memories, happy thoughts. Books say that sometimes that's enough. That intention and meaning can be as powerful as any spell. The books are right, Neve said. Come on, let's fill in this pit, scatter these bone patterns, and make sure nothing else can use this place as a doorway. We spent the rest of the day working. We broke apart the bone patterns, buried them deep in the peat where they couldn't be rearranged. We filled in the pit with stones and earth, packing it down until it was just another rise in the boggy landscape. And finally Niamh worked a binding spell, drawing on the power of the land itself to seal this place, to make it hostile to Fomorian magic. By the time we finished, it was late afternoon, and we were both exhausted and covered in peat and mud. We made our way back to the farm, where Siofra greeted us with hot water for washing and news that no sheep had gone missing during the day. "Is it done?" she asked. "For now," Niamh said. "The immediate threat is contained, but you should keep watch. If anything unusual happens, any more dreams, any more patterns, send word immediately." That evening, as we sat by the fire, and I tried to clean peat from under my fingernails, Tian asked the question I'd been half expecting. "So, what's it like, being a hero?" I thought about it, about the fear I'd felt facing the bogman, about the uncertainty, about not knowing if we'd succeed, about running into danger instead of away from it, which went against every goblin instinct I had. Terrifying, I said honestly. Absolutely terrifying, but also necessary. Someone has to do it. Might as well be someone who's read about how to do it properly. The family laughed, and for a moment, everything felt normal, safe. Just people sitting by a fire, sharing a meal, telling stories. But I knew it wouldn't last. This was just the beginning. One threat contained, but Niamh had said there were more all across Ireland. Ancient things waking up. Old darkness seeping back into the world. And somehow, improbably, a goblin who liked books had become part of the effort to stop it. That night, as I lay on my pallet, my now dim glowstone in my hand, I thought about the path I'd chosen, about leaving my clan, about becoming something more than what goblins were supposed to be. It was scary. It was dangerous. There would be more bogmen, more Fomorians, more things I couldn't even imagine yet. But there would also be more people saved, more darkness pushed back, more chances to be brave, even when terrified. And honestly, what better use was there for all that reading I'd done? I fell asleep with a smile on my face, dreaming of the next adventure, the next challenge, the next chance to prove that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, even goblin-shaped ones. We stayed with Siofra and Tian for 2 more days, resting and recovering from our encounter with the bogman. During that time, Niamh received messages from the courts. Small scraps of paper that appeared out of thin air, written in silver ink that faded after being read. Each one brought news of more disturbances. A village in Galway where milk turned to blood in the pails. A forest in Wicklow where the trees were moving at night, rearranging themselves into patterns that hurt to perceive. A lake in Kerry that had started singing in voices that drove fishermen mad. "It's accelerating," Niamh said on the 3rd morning, staring at the latest message. Whatever's breaking the old bindings, it's working faster than we thought. We need to move quickly. Oh, where to next? I asked, though part of me wanted to suggest we go back to Tara, back to my warren, back to the safety of tunnels and books and not facing ancient horrors. Connemara, Niamh said. There's a stone circle there, one of the oldest in Ireland. It's been dark for centuries, its power dormant. But 3 nights ago, it lit up like a beacon, every stone glowing with symbols that haven't been seen since the age of legends. Something's trying to use it as a gateway. A gateway to what? That's what we need to find out. She folded the message, and it dissolved in her hands, becoming nothing more than sparkles of light. Pack your things. We leave within the hour. I said goodbye to Siofra's family, who'd been wonderfully kind to a muddy goblin staying in their home. The children had especially warmed to me after I'd spent an evening reading them stories from my books. The youngest, a girl of 5, with her mother's warm eyes and her father's seal dark hair, hugged my leg fiercely. Will you come back? She asked. If I can, I promised, and next time I'll bring new stories. The journey to Connemara took us a week. We traveled mostly by night, when the roads were empty and a goblin walking alongside a fairy woman would attract less attention. By day, we rested in hidden places, abandoned cottages, hollow trees, once in a cave system that reminded me painfully of home. During those long walks through the Irish countryside, Niamh told me more about herself. How she'd been born in the Light Court, but had never quite fit in. Too restless, too questioning, too interested in the mortal world, she'd served as a guard, then a scout, then finally as what she called a freelance problem solver. The courts don't like problems, she explained as we walked through a moonlit field. They like order, tradition, everything in its proper place. But the world isn't orderly. Things happen that don't fit the categories. That's where people like me come in. We handle the messy stuff, the situations that don't have clear answers. Is that what I am? I asked. A messy situation. She laughed. You're a solution, actually. A goblin who can think and reason and work with both the fairy world and the human world. That's rare. Most goblins want nothing to do with either. They stick to their clans and their territories, and that's it. Most goblins are probably smarter than me, I muttered. Or more afraid, Niamh countered. There's a difference between caution and cowardice. You're cautious, but when it matters, you act. That's what makes you valuable. We reached Connemara on a foggy evening, the landscape all grey stone and wind-swept grass. The stone circle stood on a hillside overlooking the Atlantic, 12 standing stones arranged in a perfect ring. Each stone was taller than 2 men, weathered by centuries of wind and rain, and even from a distance I could see what Niamh had described. They were glowing, not brightly, but with a steady pulsing light that came from deep within the stone itself, as though the rock had been replaced by luminous crystal. Those symbols, I breathed, pulling out my bestiary and flipping through it frantically. I've seen them before, or versions of them. They're Ogham, but older, more complex. They spell out... Wait, this can't be right. What do they say? Niamh asked, her hand already on her sword hilt. They're a summons, I said, reading the glowing letters as best I could. Not to the Fomorians, to something else, to the Tuatha De Danann, to the old gods themselves. Someone's trying to call them back from wherever they went when they retreated from Ireland. That's impossible, Niamh said flatly. The Tuatha De Danann didn't retreat. They transformed. They became the Sidhe, the fairy folk. They're still here, just changed. Not all of them, I said, remembering my reading. Some of the oldest, the most powerful, they didn't transform. They left, went into the west, into Tir na Nog, the land of eternal youth. They haven't been seen in Ireland for over 1,000 years. And someone wants to bring them back, Niamh finished. But why? The Tuatha De Danann weren't evil. They were protectors. They fought the Fomorians, defended Ireland. Maybe whoever's doing this thinks we need that protection again, I suggested, with the Fomorians waking up. Maybe they think the only way to stop them is to bring back the old gods. Or, Niamh said darkly, maybe whoever's doing this wants to start a war, the Tuatha De Danann and the Fomorians fighting again like they did in the ancient days, and Ireland caught in the middle. We approached the stone circle carefully, watching for traps or guardians, but the hilltop seemed deserted, just the stones and the wind and the crash of waves far below on the rocky shore. Up close, the glowing symbols were even more impressive. They covered every stone, spiraling from base to top, pulsing in a rhythm that seemed to match my heartbeat. And in the center of the circle, something new had appeared. A pool of water, perfectly still, perfectly round, reflecting not the cloudy sky above, but something else. Stars. Bright stars in a sky that was impossibly clear and filled with constellations I didn't recognize. That's a portal, Niamh said, or the beginning of one. Give it a few more days and it'll be stable enough for something to come through. Can we close it? I asked. We can try. She began to circle the stones, studying the symbols. These are keyed to a specific ritual, a specific calling. If we can disrupt the pattern, break the connection, the portal should collapse. Or explode, I added. That's also a possibility. I read about a wizard who tried to close a portal once. They found pieces of him in 3 different counties. Thank you for that encouraging information, Niamh said dryly. Look for a keystone, a central symbol that the others are connected to. That's what we need to break. We split up, each examining different stones. The symbols hurt to look at directly, making my eyes water and my head ache. But I forced myself to study them, comparing them to the sketches in my bestiary, trying to understand the pattern. It was on the 7th stone that I found something different, a symbol that didn't quite match the others. It was larger, more complex, and it pulsed with a different rhythm. And beneath it, barely visible in the glowing light, was something scratched into the stone. Fresh scratches, not weathered like the ancient rock. Letters forming words in modern Irish. For Ireland's salvation and my own redemption, I read aloud. Someone mortal did this, Niamh said, coming to stand beside me. The Fomorians couldn't touch these stones without being burned, but a human, especially one with druid blood, could work this magic. Why would a druid want to bring back the Tuatha De Danann? I asked. That's a question for later, Niamh said. Right now, we need to stop this. She drew her sword and raised it high. Stand back. Wait. I grabbed her arm. If you just smash the keystone, the whole thing might collapse violently. We need to do this carefully, ritually, undo the magic the same way it was done. I don't know the rituals, Neve said. Do you? I didn't, but I had books. I pulled out my bestiary, flipped to the section on ancient Irish magic, and started reading by the light of the glowing stones. There had to be something here, some clue about how to safely dispel this kind of working. And then I found it. A counter-ritual designed to close gateways and dispel summonings. It required 3 things: a representation of earth to ground the magic, a representation of water to wash it away, and a representation of fire to burn away what remained. I can do this, I said more confidently than I felt, but I need your help. We gathered what we needed. Earth from the hilltop, dark and peaty. Water from the pool in the center of the circle, though touching it made my skin tingle uncomfortably. And fire, which Neve created with a snap of her fingers, a small flame dancing in her palm. I stood before the keystone and began to read the counter-ritual aloud, pronouncing the ancient Irish words as carefully as I could. My voice sounded small against the wind and the crash of waves, but I kept going, following the instructions in my book. First, I pressed the earth against the keystone at the base of the central symbol. The stone grew warm beneath my hands, and the glow flickered. Next, I poured the water over the symbol, watching it run down the grooves of the carved letters. The stone hissed like hot metal plunged into cold water, and steam rose in wisps. Finally, Neve touched her flame to the wet stone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the flames spread impossibly, following the water trails, running up and across the symbol, turning it from glowing blue to burning gold. The keystone cracked with a sound like thunder. The cracks spread, racing through the stone, and then jumped to the next stone in the circle, and the next, and the next. One by one, the stones went dark as the cracks raced through them. The pool in the center of the circle churned, its surface no longer smooth. The stars reflected in it winked out, replaced by ordinary cloudy sky, and then the pool simply drained away, the water sinking into the earth as though it had never been. We stood in the suddenly dark circle, breathing hard, waiting to see if something worse would happen. But the stones were just stones again, cold and ordinary and ancient. The magic was gone. "Well done," Neve said, clapping me on the shoulder. "That was impressive work." "The book deserves the credit," I said, though I was secretly pleased. "I just followed the instructions." "But you knew which instructions to follow," Neve pointed out. "And you had the courage to try. That counts for a lot." We camped that night near the stone circle, keeping watch to make sure nothing tried to restart the ritual. As we sat by our small fire, wrapped in our cloaks against the Atlantic wind, I asked the question that had been bothering me. Who's doing this? Who's trying to wake up all these ancient powers? "I don't know," Neve admitted, "but whoever it is, they're powerful and they're desperate. This takes serious magic, serious knowledge. Not many people alive today remember the old ways well enough to work rituals like this." "A druid," I said, remembering the scratch message. "Or someone with druid training." "There aren't many of those left," Neve said. "The old druid orders mostly died out centuries ago." There are a few who keep the traditions alive, but they're careful, quiet. They don't work magic like this, unless they thought they had to, I suggested. Unless they believed Ireland was in danger, and this was the only way to save it. We sat in silence for a while, watching the fire and listening to the wind. Finally, Niamh said, "We need to find whoever's doing this, not to punish them, but to talk to them, to understand why. Because if they're right, if something really is coming that requires the old gods to return, then we need to know about it. And if they're wrong, then we need to stop them before they tear Ireland apart, trying to save it." The next morning brought rain, cold and steady, turning the landscape gray and miserable. We packed up our camp and started walking, heading inland toward the next reported disturbance. This one was in County Clare, at the cliffs of Moher, where fishermen reported seeing lights beneath the waves and hearing singing that drew boats dangerously close to the rocks. We were 2 days into our journey, sheltering in a ruined abbey from a particularly fierce downpour, when we had an unexpected visitor. He was an old man, or appeared to be, bent with age, leaning heavily on a staff of blackthorn wood, his beard white as snow and hanging to his waist. He wore robes of undyed wool and a cloak that might have been green once, but was now faded to a color between gray and brown. His eyes, though, were sharp and bright, the eyes of someone much younger, trapped in an ancient body. "Griswold of Tara," he said, his voice surprisingly strong. "And Niamh of the Light Court, I've been looking for you." Niamh was on her feet instantly, sword half drawn. "Who are you?" "Peace, young one," the old man said, raising a weathered hand. "I'm not your enemy. My name is Cormac, and I was once a druid of the old order, the last of my kind, truth be told, and I believe we have much to discuss." We stared at him. Finally I found my voice. "Are you the one? The one working these rituals, trying to bring back the old powers?" Cormac's smile was sad. "No, but I know who is, and I know why. That's why I'm here, to ask for your help in stopping them before it's too late." He lowered himself carefully onto a fallen stone, his joints creaking audibly. "May I tell you a story? It's rather long, but I promise it's relevant." Niamh and I exchanged glances. Then we sat, and Cormac began to speak. 50 years ago, I had a student, a young man, brilliant and passionate, who wanted to learn the old ways. I taught him everything I knew. The languages, the rituals, the history of Ireland and its magic. He was the best student I ever had. Clever, dedicated, respectful of the old powers. Cormac's eyes grew distant, remembering. But he was also troubled. He'd lost his family young, his village destroyed by a conflict between fairy factions. He'd seen what happened when the magical world touched the mortal one without care or consequence. And he became convinced that the only way to protect Ireland, to protect humanity, was to bring back the Tuatha De Danann, to restore the old gods and have them rule Ireland again, as they did in ancient times. "Let me guess," Niamh said. "You tried to talk him out of it." "I did more than try," Cormac said. "I forbade it. I explained that the Tuatha De Danann left for a reason, that their time had passed, that bringing them back would upset the balance of power, could start wars that would devastate Ireland. He seemed to understand. He promised to let the idea go. But he didn't, I said. He did not. He left my service, took everything I taught him, and spent the next 50 years preparing, learning more magic, gathering power, researching the old rituals, and now, finally, he's ready. The disturbances you've been seeing, the waking Fomorians, the ancient powers stirring, most of that is his doing. He's been deliberately weakening the bindings, creating chaos, because he needs that chaos. He needs the fear, the desperation. He needs everyone to believe that only the return of the old gods can save Ireland. Where is he? Niamh asked. This student of yours? Newgrange, Cormac said. The great tomb, the oldest and most powerful of Ireland's ancient sites. He's been there for 3 months now, working the greatest ritual of all. On the winter solstice, when the sun shines down the passage into the heart of the tomb, he'll complete his work, and the Tuatha De Danann will be called back from Tir na Nog, whether they wish to return or not. Can we stop him? I asked. I believe so, Cormac said, but it won't be easy. He's protected the site with every ward and guard he can create. Creatures bound to his service, magical barriers, traps both physical and arcane. And he's not alone. Over the years he's gathered followers, others who believe as he does that Ireland needs its old gods returned. How long until the winter solstice? Niamh asked. 3 weeks, Cormac said. Maybe less. Time moves strangely around Newgrange right now. The magic he's working is affecting everything. 3 weeks. 21 days to travel across Ireland to Newgrange, to somehow get past all the protections, to stop a ritual 50 years in the making. It seemed impossible. But then again, a week ago, I'd been a goblin who'd never left his warren. And now I was sitting in a ruined abbey, discussing how to stop an ancient druid from reshaping Ireland's destiny. We'll do it, I said before I could talk myself out of it. We'll stop him. Cormac smiled, and for a moment he looked less like a tired old man and more like the powerful druid he must have been in his youth. I hoped you'd say that, and I won't send you unprepared. I may be old, but I still remember a few tricks. Let me teach you what you'll need to know. And so, for the next 3 days, while the rain pounded in the ruined abbey walls, Cormac taught us. He taught me more about Irish magic, about reading the old symbols, about understanding the patterns that power followed. He taught Niamh about the specific wards and protections his student favored, and how to counter them. But most importantly, he taught us about the man himself. Fionn was his name, though he'd taken the title of the Awakener. He was brilliant but obsessed, caring but ruthless, a man who believed so strongly in his cause that he'd sacrifice anything for it. He's not evil, Cormac said on our last evening together. That's important to understand. He truly believes he's saving Ireland. If you go in thinking he's a villain, you'll fail. You need to see him as he is, someone who's been hurt and is trying to prevent others from being hurt the same way. His methods are wrong, catastrophically wrong, but his intentions come from a place of care. Oh, how do we stop someone like that? I asked. With compassion, Cormac said simply, and with truth. Show him that there's another way. Make him see that what he's doing will cause more harm than it prevents. It won't be easy. He spent 50 years building up his convictions, but I have to believe that somewhere inside him is still the young man I taught, the one who genuinely wanted to help people. The morning Cormac left, he gave us each a gift. To Niamh, he gave a small stone carved with protective runes. "This will get you past most of the wards at Newgrange," he said, "but not all. Some you'll have to deal with the old-fashioned way." To me, he gave a book. It was ancient, the leather cover soft with age, the pages yellowed but still readable. "This is my personal grimoire," he said. "Everything I know about Irish magic is in here. I've been carrying it for 70 years, and I think it's time it went to someone who'll actually use it." I held the book carefully, almost reverently. "I can't take this. This is your life's work. And what good is it doing sitting in my pack?" Cormac asked. "You'll need it, Griswold. There are rituals in there, counters to what Fionn is working. Study it, learn it, and use it well." We parted ways at the edge of the Abbey ruins, Cormac heading south toward his cottage in Kerry, Niamh and I heading north and east toward Newgrange and whatever awaited us there. As we walked, I read Cormac's grimoire, absorbing everything I could. The magic of Ireland was complex, tied to the land itself, to the cycles of the seasons, to the eternal dance between light and dark. The Tuatha De Danann hadn't just ruled Ireland, they'd been part of it, woven into its very essence. Calling them back wasn't like summoning a spirit or a demon. It was like trying to call back yesterday, to make time flow backward. It was impossible, but Fionn had found a way, or thought he had. The question was, what would actually happen if his ritual succeeded? Would the Tuatha De Danann truly return, or would something else come through? Something that wore their faces but wasn't them at all? I didn't know, but I suspected we were going to find out. We travelled for 2 weeks, making our way across Ireland toward the Boyne Valley where Newgrange waited. The journey was not without incident. On the road to Athlone, we encountered a pack of Pucas, shape-shifting fairy creatures who'd apparently decided that chaos was the order of the day. They'd been terrorizing a small village, stealing livestock, and causing general mayhem. Normally, Pucas were mostly harmless tricksters, but these seemed different, more aggressive, more malicious. It took us half a day to track them down, and another half to convince them to leave the village alone. In the end, it wasn't threats or violence that worked, but a deal. Niamh promised them access to better hunting grounds if they'd move on, and I sweetened the pot by teaching their leader to read. Pucas, it turned out, had always wanted to know what all those human signs said. In Mullingar, we stopped to rest at an inn and overheard travellers talking about strange occurrences. Trees walking in Leinster, rivers running backward in Munster, the sky turning green over Ulster for 3 straight nights. The whole of Ireland seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. "It's the ritual," Niamh said as we sat in our room, planning our approach to Newgrange. "The magic Fionn is working. It's so powerful it's affecting the whole country. Reality is becoming thin, flexible. If he completes it, if he actually manages to tear open a gateway to Tir na Nog, there's no telling what might happen." "Could it destroy Ireland?" I asked, paging through Cormac's grimoire. It could destroy everything, Niamh said grimly. Tir na nog exists outside normal time and space. It's a realm of pure magic, untainted by the mortal world, opening a permanent gateway between there and here. It would be like puncturing a dam. The magic would flood through, drowning everything. I found a passage in the grimoire that seemed relevant and read it aloud. The land of the ever-young is not meant for mortal soil. What belongs to the West must stay in the West, lest the boundary between life and death, between time and timelessness, dissolve utterly. Cheerful, Niamh muttered. So we definitely need to stop this. Definitely, I agreed. The question is how. We planned late into the night, discussing approaches, strategies, contingencies. By the time we finally slept, my head was full of magical theory and tactical considerations, and I dreamed of standing stones and ancient gods and gateways to impossible places. We reached the Boyne Valley on a grey morning, exactly 1 week before the winter solstice. Newgrange rose before us like a giant's breast, a massive mound of earth and stone, its entrance marked by a passage that ran deep into the heart of the structure. The whole site was surrounded by standing stones, and even from a distance I could feel the power radiating from it. There are people guarding the entrance, Niamh said, her fairy sight allowing her to see details I couldn't. 6 of them, wearing robes, Fion's followers, and there are magical wards too, layered thick. This is going to be tricky. We could try talking to them, I suggested. Explain what we think is really going to happen. Worth a try, Niamh agreed, though she didn't sound hopeful. But keep ready to run. Fanatics rarely respond well to reasonable conversation. We approached the entrance openly, making no attempt to hide. The 6 robed figures noticed us immediately and moved to block our path. Up close, I could see they were a mix of humans and halflings, all wearing expressions of determined faith. Go no further, one of them said, a middle-aged woman with iron-grey hair. The Awakener is at work, and he must not be disturbed. We need to speak with him, Niamh said calmly. We have information he needs to hear. The Awakener speaks with no one, another guard said, a young man who looked barely 20. His work is too important, too delicate. You must leave. Listen to me, I said, stepping forward. I know you believe you're helping Ireland, but the ritual Fionn is working. It's dangerous. If it succeeds, it could destroy everything you're trying to protect. Lies, the woman spat. The fairy folk have always feared our liberation. They want to keep us weak, dependent, trapped in their games and their courts. But the Awakener will free us. He'll bring back the true gods, the ones who loved Ireland and its people. The Tuatha De Danann didn't leave because they stopped loving Ireland, I tried to explain. They left because their time was over. Bringing them back by force, it goes against the natural order of things. Nature itself is in rebellion, the young man said, gesturing around us. Can't you feel it? The land is crying out for its true rulers to return. Every storm, every strange occurrence, it's Ireland herself calling to the Tuatha De Danann. That's not Ireland calling, Niamh said. That's the side effects of the magic Fionn is using. He's tearing holes in reality and the damage is spreading. But I could see we weren't getting through. These people had committed themselves so fully to their cause that no argument, no matter how logical, would sway them. They'd made their choice, and they'd defend it with their lives if necessary. "We're going in," Neve said flatly. "Stand aside." "We cannot," the woman said, and she and her companions drew weapons. Not iron, I noticed with some relief. They wouldn't use that against us, but they had bronze blades, stone-tipped spears, weapons of the old style that could still hurt plenty. What followed was brief and somewhat embarrassing for everyone involved. Neve was a trained warrior of the Light Court, and I, despite my bookish nature, had learned enough from Nash to hold my own in a fight. The guards were determined but not particularly skilled, and they were reluctant to actually harm us. Within minutes we disarmed them and sent them scattering. "I feel terrible," I said as we watched them retreat. "They're not bad people. They're just mistaken." "Mistaken people with weapons are still dangerous," Neve pointed out. "Come on. They'll regroup and come back with reinforcements. We need to get inside before that happens." The entrance to Newgrange was exactly as I'd read about in my books. A narrow passage, barely 4 feet high, lined with massive stones carved with spirals and lozenges and zigzags. The symbols seemed to writhe in the corner of my vision, and I felt the weight of ages pressing down as we entered. Niamh took out the protective stone Cormac had given her. It glowed faintly, pushing back against the wards that tried to bar our passage. We moved forward carefully, bent nearly double to fit through the low passage. The passage ran for maybe 60 feet, perfectly straight, leading into the heart of the mound. And at the end, it opened into a chamber. The chamber, the heart of Newgrange, where for thousands of years the solstice sun had shone once a year, illuminating this sacred space. But now it was illuminated by something else. Magic, raw and brilliant, swirling in complex patterns that filled the air like visible wind. And in the center of it all stood a man. Fionn was not what I'd expected. I'd pictured someone ancient, withered by his years of obsessive study. But the man before us looked to be in his 40s, vigorous and intense, with dark hair streaked with grey and eyes that burned with absolute conviction. He wore robes covered in symbols, and his hands moved in constant gestures shaping the magic that filled the chamber. He didn't turn to look at us. He didn't need to. "Cormac sent you," he said, his voice carrying clearly over the humming of magic. I wondered if he would. The old fool never could let things go. "Cormac loves you," I said. "He's worried about you, about what you're trying to do." "Love," Fionn said, and now he did turn to face us. His expression was a mix of sorrow and determination. "Love is why I'm doing this. Love for Ireland, for its people, for everyone who's been hurt by the careless games of the fairy courts. We're not here to hurt anyone," Niamh said carefully. "We just want to talk, to understand." Fionn laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Understand? How could you understand? You're Cedar. You're one of them. Your people treat humans like toys, like pets at best and pests at worst. Do you have any idea how many mortal lives have been destroyed by fairy whims? How many families torn apart? How many children stolen? How many people driven mad?" "I know," Niamh said quietly. "I've seen it. That's why I left the court. Why I work to help people." Then you should understand why this is necessary, Fionn said. The Tuatha De Danann weren't like the Cedar. They cared about Ireland. They protected its people. Under their rule, humans and magical beings lived in harmony. That's a romanticized version of history, I said, pulling out my books. I've read the old tales. The Tuatha De Danann were powerful, yes, and many were benevolent. But they were also capricious. They had wars among themselves. They made demands of mortals that were sometimes terrible. They weren't perfect rulers. They were gods, with all the flaws that implies. Better than what we have now, Fionn countered. Better than chaos and uncertainty and the constant threat of the Fomorians breaking free. The Fomorians are only breaking free because you're weakening the bindings, Niamh said. You've been deliberately destabilizing the old magic, creating the very crisis you claim to be solving. For the first time, Fionn looked uncertain. That's necessary. The ritual requires a certain level of instability. Once the Tuatha De Danann return, they'll restore order. They'll bind the Fomorians properly, the way they did in ancient times. Or the Fomorians will use the same gateway you're creating to escape completely, I said. Fionn, the magic you're working, it doesn't discriminate. You're opening the door between Tir na Nog and here. But there are other places in the west, other realms. What if something else comes through? What if you called the Tuatha De Danann and the Fomorians answer instead? I saw doubt flicker across his face just for a moment, but then it hardened back into certainty. I've taken precautions. The ritual is specific, carefully crafted. Only the Tuatha De Danann can answer the call. Can you be sure? I pressed. Have you tested it? Have you confirmed that every single aspect works exactly as intended? Because if you're wrong, if there's even one flaw in your calculations, you could destroy Ireland instead of saving it. I've spent 50 years on this, Fionn said, but now he sounded defensive rather than confident. 50 years studying, preparing, perfecting. I'm not wrong. Cormac spent 70 years studying the same magic, I said gently, and he thinks you're making a terrible mistake. Not because you're stupid or evil, but because you're hurt. Because you saw something awful happen, and you've been trying to prevent it from ever happening again, but this isn't the way. Then what is? Fionn demanded. What's your solution? Let things continue as they are. Let the courts play their games while mortals suffer. Let the Fomorians wake up slowly until one day they're free, and it's too late to stop them. We work together, Niamh said. The courts, the mortals, people like Griswold who bridge both worlds. We build alliances. We strengthen the bindings properly, not by ripping open new holes in reality. We face the problems one at a time, carefully, intelligently. That's too slow, Fionn said. By the time your alliances are built, how many people will have died? How many more families destroyed? And how many will die if your ritual goes wrong? I asked. Fionn, please, just stop for a moment. Don't complete the ritual. Give us time to study it, to verify it's safe. If it really is as solid as you think, then we can discuss whether it's the right thing to do. But don't gamble all of Ireland on a spell you can't be certain of. For a long moment, Fionn was silent. The magic swirled around him, and I could see him wavering, genuinely considering what we'd said. All those years of certainty, of conviction, suddenly confronted with doubt. And then the chamber shook. The ground beneath our feet trembled, and from deep below, from somewhere far beneath even these ancient stones, came a sound. A roar, vast and terrible, like the earth itself crying out in pain or rage. "What was that?" Niam demanded. Fion's face had gone pale. That's not part of the ritual, that's... the Fomorians," I said, understanding with horrible clarity. "The instability you created, the weakening of the bindings, it's given them an opening. They're not waiting for your gateway, they're making their own." Another roar, closer this time. The symbols carved on the chamber walls began to glow, but not with the clean blue light of Fion's magic. This was a sickly green, pulsing like an infection. "We need to seal this place," Neve said urgently. "Now, before something breaks through. If I stop the ritual halfway, the backlash will level half of County Meath," Fion said, and now I could hear panic in his voice. "It's too far advanced. It needs to either complete or be channeled into something else." "Then channel it," I said, pulling out Cormac's grimoire and flipping through it frantically. "There has to be something here, some way to redirect the energy." The chamber shook again, harder this time. Cracks appeared in the floor, glowing with that sickly green light. And from those cracks, something began to emerge. Hands, grey and massive, clawing at the edges of reality. "No, no, no," Fion was muttering, his hands moving faster, trying to control magic that was slipping away from him. "This isn't right. This wasn't supposed to happen." "Griswold," Niam shouted. She'd drawn her sword and was standing between us and the emerging hands. "Whatever you're going to do, do it fast." I found a passage in the grimoire, a ritual for grounding wild magic, for channeling it safely into the earth. It wasn't designed for something this powerful, but it was all we had. "Fion," I called out, "I need you to redirect the ritual energy towards me. All of it. Can you do that?" "That'll kill you," Fion said. "You're not strong enough to handle that much power." "I'm not going to hold it," I explained quickly. "I'm going to ground it, send it into the earth, distribute it across all of Ireland instead of concentrating it here. It won't bring back the Tuatha De Danann, but it might save us from the Fomorians." "Might?" Niam asked, still watching the hands clawing at the cracks. "Might," I confirmed. "Now can we please do this before those things get all the way through?" Fion looked at me, at Neve, at the cracks spreading across his sacred chamber, and then he nodded. "Tell me what to do." I read the ritual from the grimoire, translating the old Irish into instructions Fion could follow. It was complex, requiring perfect timing and absolute precision. One mistake and the energy would explode instead of dissipating. But Fion, for all his obsession, really was brilliant. He understood what I was asking for, and his hands began to move in new patterns, redirecting the swirling magic. The energy that had been reaching toward Tir na Nog, trying to open a gateway to the realm of the gods, now curved down and around, flowing toward where I stood. I could feel it approaching, like standing in the path of a waterfall, and every instinct I had screamed at me to run. But I held my ground. I opened Cormac's grimoire to the grounding ritual and began to read aloud, speaking the words clearly, carefully, pronouncing each syllable exactly as written. The magic hit me like a physical blow, and for a moment I thought Fionn had been right, that it was too much, that I would be torn apart by the sheer force of it. But then I felt something else. The goblin nature I'd always possessed, the connection to earth and stone that all my kind shared. We were creatures of the underground, of tunnels and caves and deep places. And deep places were what I needed now. The magic flowed through me, and I sent it down, 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 into the earth. Not holding it, just guiding it, letting it spread through the bedrock and the soil, through the ancient bones of Ireland itself. I felt it branch and divide, flowing through underground rivers and along the roots of ancient trees, spreading across the whole island in a web of power. And where it went, it strengthened. The old bindings that held the Fomorians in check, worn thin by time and Fionn's interference, they absorbed the magic and grew stronger. The cracks in the chamber floor began to close, and the clawing hands withdrew, pulled back into whatever deep darkness they'd emerged from. The roaring faded. The sickly green light dimmed and died. And finally, the flow of magic ended, the last of it draining away through me into the earth. I collapsed, utterly spent, and Niamh caught me before I hit the ground. "Is it done?" Fionn asked, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Did it work?" "It worked," Niamh confirmed. "The Fomorians are bound again, and the ritual, your ritual, it's ended safely. The energy is dispersed." Fionn sank to his knees, all the strength going out of him. 50 years, he said quietly. 50 years of work, and in the end it nearly destroyed everything I was trying to save. "You meant well," I said, though speaking was difficult. Every part of me ached, and I felt like I'd been wrung out like a wet cloth. "You wanted to help. That counts for something." "Does it?" Fionn asked bitterly. "I weakened the bindings. I nearly let the Fomorians through. I put all of Ireland at risk because I was so certain I was right. You also created the power that let us strengthen those bindings," I pointed out. "The magic you raised, it's been redistributed, but it's still there. Ireland is safer now than it was before you started, just not in the way you expected." "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" Fionn asked. "No," I said honestly. "I think you're going to feel terrible about this for a long time. But maybe you can use that feeling. Maybe you can take what you've learned and help us find better ways to protect people. Ways that don't involve ripping holes in reality." Fionn was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, straightened his robes, and looked at us properly for the first time. "Cormac was right about you," he said to me. "A goblin scholar. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it." He turned to Niamh. "And a fairy who actually cares about mortals. Perhaps things are changing after all." "Perhaps they are," Niamh agreed. "The question is, what are you going to do now?" "I don't know," Fionn admitted. "My followers, they're not going to understand. They believed in the vision I sold them, the return of the old gods, telling them it was all a mistake." "Then don't tell them it was a mistake," I suggested. "Tell them it was a success, just a different kind. The magic you raised, it did protect Ireland. It strengthened the defenses against the Fomorians. That was the goal, wasn't it? Keeping Ireland safe. Fionn considered this. That's a rather generous interpretation. Maybe, I said. But it's also true. You did good work here, Fionn. Just not the work you thought you were doing. We left Newgrange as the sun was setting, the three of us exhausted but alive. Fionn had agreed to dismantle the remaining ritual components and send his followers home. He'd also agreed to meet with Cormac to repair their relationship if possible, and to work with the courts to monitor the Fomorian bindings and ensure they stayed strong. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was better than it might have been. As Neve and I walked away from the great mound, heading back toward the road and whatever adventures lay ahead, I thought about everything that had happened. A month ago, I'd been a goblin in a cave, reading books and avoiding responsibility. Now I was, what? A hero? A diplomat? A conduit for vast magical energies? I didn't have a good word for it. But I knew that I'd found my purpose, my place in the world, bridging the gaps between different peoples, using knowledge to solve problems, being brave when bravery was needed, even though I was terrified. You did well back there, Niamh said as we walked. Really well. I'm not sure anyone else could have done what you did. I just read the instructions in the book, I said modestly. You knew which book to consult, Neve countered. You understood the theory well enough to improvise. You stood your ground when most people would have run. That's not just following instructions, Griswold. That's genuine courage and skill. I felt my ears warm with the praise. So, what's next? Next we rest, Niamh said. Find a comfortable inn, sleep for about 3 days straight, and eat our weight in hot food. And then once we've recovered, we see what other problems need solving. The courts are still stretched thin. There's still work to be done. Works that involves more ancient horrors? I asked. Probably, Niamh admitted with a grin. Is that going to be a problem? I thought about my clan back at Tara, about my books and my comfortable alcove. I could go back. I'd proven myself, done the brave thing. I could return to the Warren and spend the rest of my days reading and teaching the young ones, satisfied that I'd had one grand adventure. But I thought about Deirdre, the child I'd saved, about the families in Cork who could sleep safely now that the bogman was gone, about all the people who would never know how close they'd come to disaster at Newgrange, but who were safe because we'd stopped it. No problem at all, I said. I'm in this for the long term. Someone has to keep you fairy folk from mucking things up. Niamh laughed, bright and clear in the evening air. A goblin keeping the fairies in line. Now that's a story worth telling. And so we walked on, two unlikely companions, heading toward the next adventure, the next challenge, the next opportunity to make Ireland a little bit safer and a little bit better. I had my books in my pack. Cormac's grimoire safely wrapped to protect it from weather, my dim but recovering glowstone, and a friend walking beside me. For a goblin who'd once thought his greatest adventure would be finding a rare book in a merchant's wagon, it was a remarkable turn of events. But then again, life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. And I wouldn't have had it any other way. We stopped for the night at a small village called Slane, just south of Newgrange. The local inn was warm and welcoming, and the innkeeper's wife, a cheerful woman named Maeve, took one look at us, muddy and exhausted, and immediately insisted on drawing us baths and preparing hot food. As I soaked in a copper tub, washing away days of travel and the lingering sensation of channeling enough magic to power a small kingdom, I reflected on how much my life had changed. A month ago, the idea of sitting in a hot bath in a human inn, accepted and even welcomed, would have been absurd. Goblins didn't do that sort of thing. We stayed hidden, stayed separate, stayed safe. But staying safe had meant staying small, never taking risks, never reaching beyond what was familiar and comfortable. And I realized now that I'd been living half a life, reading about adventures instead of having them. That night, cleaned and fed and lying in an actual bed with actual blankets, I took out my journal, a new acquisition from a bookshop in Athlone. I'd started keeping notes of our adventures, partly for my own reference, partly because I thought someday someone might want to know how a goblin scholar and a fairy warrior saved Ireland from itself. I wrote about Fionn, about his misguided attempt to fix the world, about how good intentions and great power could still lead to disaster without wisdom to guide them. I wrote about the feel of magic flowing through me, that strange mix of terror and exhilaration, like standing at the edge of a cliff and choosing to jump. But mostly, I wrote about hope, because despite everything, despite the dangers and the close calls and the constant uncertainty, I was hopeful that the world could change, that different peoples could work together, that maybe, just maybe, we could build something better than what came before. The next morning brought a surprise visitor. I was having breakfast in the common room, enjoying fresh bread and honey, when a familiar figure entered the inn, old and bent, leaning on a staff of blackthorn wood, white beard flowing. "Cormac," I said, standing immediately. "How did you know where to find you?" The old druid smiled. "I have my ways. The land itself whispers to those who know how to listen." He settled onto the bench across from me with a grateful sigh. "I came to thank you, and to check that you're both still alive. Fionn sent me word of what happened." "He did?" I was surprised. I wasn't sure he would. "He's many things, but he's not a coward," Cormac said. "He told me everything. How you stopped him, how you redirected the ritual, how you probably saved his life along with everyone else's." The old druid's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. "I was so afraid I'd lost him completely, that he'd gone so far down this path that there was no bringing him back. But you reached him. You made him see reason." "I'm not sure how much reason was involved," I admitted. "Mostly it was panic and improvisation. The best magic often is," Cormac said with a chuckle. He pulled out a small wrapped package and pushed it across the table. "This is for you, a gift and a request." I unwrapped it carefully to find a small crystal, perfectly clear, the size of my thumb. It glowed with a soft inner light, much brighter than my old glowstone had ever been. "It's a focus," Cormac explained. "Properly attuned, it will help you sense magical currents, detect when ancient powers are stirring. Consider it a tool of the trade. If you're going to continue this work, helping to maintain the balance, you'll need ways to know when and where you're needed." "Continue this work?" I repeated, looking up from the crystal. "That is the request," Cormac said seriously. I'm old, Griswold, very old. I won't be here much longer, a few years at most. And when I'm gone, there will be no druids left in Ireland. The old order will have truly passed, but the old magic will still be here. The ancient powers will still need watching. Someone will need to understand them, to work with them, to stop them when necessary. You want me to become a druid? I asked, barely believing it. In all but name, you already are, Cormac said. You've studied the law, learned the rituals, proven you have the wisdom and the courage. Being a druid isn't about lineage or formal training. It's about serving the land, about maintaining the balance between magic and mundane, about being a bridge. And that, my young friend, is exactly what you are. I held the crystal, feeling its weight, its potential. A druid, a goblin druid. It was absurd. It was impossible. It was perfect. I accept, I said, though I warn you I'm going to do things differently than the old ways. I'll work with the fairy courts, not against them. I'll share knowledge instead of hoarding it. And I'll probably write everything down in books so others can learn. Cormac laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. Good. The old ways were old precisely because we never let them change. Time you showed us how it should be done. He stood, leaning heavily on his staff. Come see me in Kerry when you have time. There are a few more things I'd like to teach you before I go. After Cormac left, Neve came down from her room and joined me at the table. I showed her the crystal and told her about Cormac's offer. A druid, she said thoughtfully. That's going to cause some interesting reactions at court. They're not going to know whether to be honored or horrified that a goblin holds such a position. Let them be both, I said with more confidence than I felt. I'm tired of worrying about what people think I should be. I'm just going to be what I am and do what needs doing. Spoken like a true hero, Neve said, grinning. Then her expression turned more serious. I got word this morning, too, from the Light Court. They're officially recognizing our partnership, making it an authorized position. We're to continue as we have been, monitoring threats and responding to disturbances. They're even providing a small stipend for expenses. We're getting paid? I asked, surprised. Barely, Neve said. But yes, apparently, word of what we did at Newgrange has spread. The courts are impressed. They want us to keep doing what we're doing. Does that mean there will be more adventures? I asked. Definitely, Neve confirmed. In fact, I've already heard about our next job. There's a situation developing in Connaught, a village where all the iron has turned to gold overnight, which sounds like a blessing until you realize they can't make horseshoes, nails, tools, or anything else they actually need. Probably fairy mischief, but we should investigate. I thought about it, another adventure, another problem to solve, another chance to help. It was exhausting just thinking about it, but it was also exciting in a way that reading about adventures in books had never been. When do we leave? I asked. Tomorrow, Niamh said. But today we rest, we eat good food, we sleep in actual beds, and we prepare. Because something tells me Connaught is just the beginning. She was right, of course. Connaught was just the beginning. Over the weeks and months that followed, Niamh and I crisscrossed Ireland, handling disturbances both magical and mundane. We dealt with a Selkie who'd forgotten how to remove her seal's skin and was stuck halfway between forms. We negotiated a peace treaty between a village and a local Banshee who was taking her mourning duties a bit too seriously. We tracked down a thief who was stealing magical artifacts, not for profit, but to build a museum of Irish magic for future generations. Each adventure taught me something new about magic, about people, about myself. I learned that being a hero didn't mean being fearless. It meant being afraid and doing what needed to be done anyway. I learned that most conflicts could be resolved with conversation and understanding, but sometimes you really did have to hit something with a stick. I learned that books were invaluable, but experience was irreplaceable. And I learned that I was good at this, really good. My goblin ability to move unseen and unheard was perfect for reconnaissance. My love of reading meant I always had obscure knowledge that turned out to be vital. My natural caution balanced Neve's tendency to rush in sword first. We made a good team. 6 months after the incident at Newgrange, we found ourselves back at the Hill of Tara. Niamh had business with the Light Court, and I wanted to visit my clan. I hadn't been back since leaving, and I was nervous about what kind of reception I'd get. I needn't have worried. When I descended into the warren, Gorm greeted me with a fierce hug that nearly cracked my ribs. Grandmother Grick had tears in her eyes as she patted my cheek and told me I'd grown, even though I was exactly the same size I'd always been. And Nash, my brother, looked at me with something that might have been respect. "Tell us everything," Gorm demanded, pulling me toward the fire in the main chamber. "We've heard stories, wild stories about a goblin working with the fairies, stopping ancient evils, becoming some kind of hero, but we want to hear it from you." So I told them. I told them about Deirdre and the Bogman and Newgrange and all the adventures in between. The clan listened, rapt, and when I finished there was a moment of awed silence. Then Grandmother Grick spoke. "You've made us proud, young Griswold. Proud to be goblins, proud to be your clan. You've shown that we can be more than thieves and tricksters, that we can be heroes too." "I'm not a hero," I protested, though less vehemently than I had before. "I'm just a goblin who reads a lot and tries to help when he can. That's what heroes are," Gorm said quietly. "People who help when they can. Nothing more, nothing less." I stayed with the clan for 3 days, teaching the young ones, sharing stories, catching up on Warren gossip. On the 3rd night, as I sat in my old alcove surrounded by my original collection of books, Nash came to visit. "So," he said, settling onto the floor beside me, "you're really doing it, living with the fairies, fighting monsters, all that mad stuff." "I am," I confirmed. "Is it worth it?" he asked. "The danger, the uncertainty, never having a proper home." I thought about it, about the terror of facing the Bogman, the exhaustion of channeling massive magical energies, the constant travel and the endless problems to solve. "Yes," I said simply, "it's worth it. Every moment." Nash nodded slowly. "Then I'm glad for you. Even if I don't understand it, even if it seems completely mad to me, I'm glad you found your path." "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. On my last morning at Tara, before I left to rejoin Niamh, I stood at the entrance to the warren looking out over the plains of Meath. My home, my beginnings, but no longer my whole world. My father stood beside me. "You'll come back sometimes?" he asked, As often as I can, I promised. This is still home. You're still my family. That doesn't change just because I'm off having adventures. Good, Gorm said, because those young ones you've been teaching, they're asking questions now, wanting to know about the world beyond the Warren. You've started something, Griswold. Changed how they think about what goblins can be. Is that a good thing? I asked, suddenly worried. Gorm smiled. It's a necessary thing. The world is changing whether we like it or not. Better to change with it than get left behind. He hugged me again, quick and fierce. Go save Ireland some more. Make us proud. And so I did. For years, Neve and I worked together, becoming something of a legend in our own right. The goblin scholar and the fairy warrior, showing up wherever they were needed, solving problems that no one else could or would handle. We weren't perfect. We made mistakes, had failures, sometimes made things worse before making them better. But we always tried, always cared, always did our best to help. And maybe that's all anyone can really do. Years later, when I was older and perhaps slightly wiser, I wrote down our adventures, not as dry historical accounts, but as stories, the kind I'd loved reading as a young goblin in the Warren. Stories of courage and cleverness, of friendship and sacrifice, of how the unlikeliest people can become heroes if they just care enough to try. And at the end of every story, I made sure to include a simple truth that I'd learned over years of adventure. Heroes aren't born. They're not chosen by destiny or marked by prophecy. They're ordinary people who, when faced with something wrong, decide to try to make it right, even when they're scared. Especially when they're scared, that's what makes them heroes. Not perfect strength or unshakable courage, just the willingness to try. And that, my dear friends, is where we'll end tonight's story. I hope you enjoyed following Griswold on his journey from the tunnels beneath Tara, through bogs and stone circles and ancient tombs, learning that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who never expected to be heroes at all. May we all have the courage to try when trying is needed. Until next time, stay safe and sweet dreams.